Okay, so firstly, I mean, welcome everyone again to another Sunday morning SHtory, and I'm going to welcome Jonny Gould. But before I do, Jonny, before I give you the big welcome that you quite rightly deserve, it's the interviewer being interviewed by someone who's never interviewed anyone before. Give me one tip. Give me the one piece of advice that I need to make this smooth in interviewing you.
I think the best advice I could give you, Lawrence, and perhaps I should have given you this at the end, is
Jonny,
to
I haven't got you on screen. I haven't got you on screen, and I'm talking.
Can you see me now?
Hold
can
on.
Everyone see me?
Yes, I can see you now. There we go.
Okay. My advice to you, Lawrence, is to try and take the interviewee by surprise. Get them to think, oh gosh, you put me on the spot there, or I hadn't thought about that. And then you might get a moment of, you know, a stream of consciousness from them, a sort of a letting down of the barriers in an effort to speak on a subject. I've done that a few times in this series. So, you know, if you can take me by surprise, then you might get a good interview.
Okay, well, that's a good piece of advice. But okay, just to interview. So Jonny Gould is a member of Southampton, been a member for many years. But Jonny was born and bred in Birmingham. He writes that he grew up in a sane Orthodox Jewish household. Well, I'll find out what that means a little bit later. But Jonny is a broadcaster. And for the last 30 to 40 years, I suppose we can say you've worked through the revolution in broadcasting, the digital world, and you've most likely seen it all. But I think I'm right in saying that this began at the age of 9, when you were bought a tape recorder and you went out in the street and started interviewing people, and that was it. And by the age of 18, you already had a job with BBC WM, West Midlands, and you never looked back. Is that correct, Jonny?
Yeah, that's not bad at all. My dad gave me a reel-to-reel recorder, which was very, very close to the sort of equipment that we used to use in newsrooms. And so I used to know how to thread the recorder through the play and record, which is what I did. And I was an avid radio listener. And I listened to a lot of football, and you know, we were blessed in the 70s and early 80s with some of the very best football in the country, and that sort of obsession. It's amazing when you watch your kids as they grow up, because you know what they're exposed to really does provide for their influence.
Answer the phones, Andy, please.
Could you please mute yourselves, please?
Yeah. I didn't know.
Robert, I think that's you. Could you mute? Thank you.
Lawrence, can you mute everyone from your end? I think you can. You're the governor, aren't you?
I can mute everybody.
Yes, Caroline, if you can, because I'm using an iPad. Thanks.
Everyone is muted at the moment except Lawrence and Jonny.
Okay. Well, that was a good start, Jonny. I'm doing well.
Yeah, it was like tuning into WM, you know, 0.1 of a megahertz off the frequency, wasn't it?
Carry on.
I don't know if you heard it, but basically, yes, it was. My dad bought me a reel-to-reel tape recorder, and it's, you know, I think the one thing that I've learned from it was that, you know, I was so obsessed with radio and football. Those were my two things, and to be able to put the two together and talk about football on the radio was a career path that I was extremely lucky to have followed. And when I look back at it, it really was a blessed life, you know. You think these things are accessible. The fact that they exist in the first place is a miracle, you know, because it was a really amazing time, because, you know, I wasn't brought up in Bristol where the football's rubbish. I wasn't brought up in, you know, I don't know, Middlesbrough, where you go up and down like nobody's business, and one club and in a small town. I was in this fantastic conurbation where European champions were being formed, where cup winners were being created, and even better, our local rivals were getting relegated all the time. So it was just a marvellous, marvellous cocktail of pleasure. And, and it didn't take me very long to put demo tapes in, get a bit of experience. I did what the elders told me to do, go to hospital radio. And then within a short period of time, I found myself on BBC Radio WM's breakfast show. And, you know, I was just barely out of teens. It was a dream come true. And one of the benefits was that I developed a bit of a microphone voice even as a kid, because I worked out pretty quickly that if you put headphones on, it can affect the way you talk. And that's never left me. I had a voice a bit like this when I was a kid. So I'm so very lucky, really, very blessed as I look back. You know, it's funny how you appreciate these things when you get older. Perhaps when they're taken away a bit.
How did your family, your parents, react? You know, you weren't perhaps following the normal path. You know, did you left school straight away and went into a BBC WM? Is that how it happened?
No, I left school. I left school at 18. I did my O levels and then my A levels, and I think I'd best describe it as this: I got knocked out in the quarterfinals of education. But one of the wonderful things about journalism is it's the white collar profession where you don't need a tertiary education. In fact, it is the beginning of thinking. If you're a proper journalist, you begin to think when you leave school, and you can learn from every single interviewee. I think that's another secret of interviewing. You know, rather than trying to get the story on your terms, if you can listen to an interviewee and maybe that sort of kernel of an idea can actually improve you incrementally each time. That's certainly been the case for the Jewish podcasts that I've done in recent years. Each one of those brilliant people have contributed to my education, including many in the Jewish community here in South Hampstead. It is a rich, it's a rich community of people, and I've interviewed several members of this community, including Lord Leslie Turnberg about Balfour, Jonathan Turner with his brave work on behalf of the UK Lawyers for Israel, Trevor Horn, who is and remains my great pop music hero for all he did from the 80s right through to now. And there's someone else. Who else did I get from here, from the Jewish community? I'm going to get my block knocked off because I've forgotten someone. Anyway, it's a great community to get great people to talk. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we've certainly found that on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
You know, you put stories to just the faces and the names that you occasionally see in the synagogue, and you realise the depth of the talent in the community is fantastic, and the different stories are quite amazing. But just go back a little bit, Jonny. What was life growing up in Birmingham? You say you lived near Aston, is that right?
No, well, we when I was 4 years old, we moved into main Birmingham, but my parents bought a home 2 doors from my mum's parents, which was in Sutton Coldfield. And they were refugees from Vienna. And living in Sutton Coldfield, as it was a legacy of where they could afford to live. They couldn't afford to live in Birmingham. So they when they came, they had a room upstairs. They were lodgers in a room next to Sutton Town Football Club, which is a non-league team. And within 10 years, I mean, I think their story is amazing, really, because they were basically, for the want of a better description, middle-class, prosperous Viennese, sophisticates, if you like, people from the city who were basically robbed of everything, including their parents, and had to start again. And I think their story is a great inspiration, because by 1956, they'd pulled themselves together. They bought themselves a very nice home in Sutton Coldfield in the 50s. My grandfather had a Morris Oxford. He'd even won the pools. He won the pools. The ex-professional footballer knew who was going to draw 8 times and won the pools. I think it was like the equivalent of probably about 40 grand today, because he bought a car, a fridge, and a telly. And those are big things in 1956. And they, and that's where I remember them. Unfortunately, my grandfather passed away when I was 2, but I do have sort of memories of him as a child. But my grandma lived well into my life, which I'm very grateful for. And that's where they lived, and that's where I started. And then we moved into mainland Birmingham, where the larger Jewish community was. I lived in an area called Harborne, which is next to Edgbaston. And I went to school in Moseley at King David. The Jewish community was really quite visible. I mean, it was never a big community. Birmingham's quite small, considering the city is absolutely huge. So if you think about the community, even at its height, was maybe at 5,000. In a city of 1 million, in a conurbation of 2.5 million. It brings you up in a different way. You know, there's no Jewish area. There are Jewish people who live in the street, but actually it's not a Jewish place to grow up. And it was largely harmonious. It was pretty good. I did experience name calling at school, in my secondary school. I went to a Jewish primary school, but the secondary school was a grammar school, which was in Handsworth, which was having its difficulties in the 1980s. There were riots going on, and the grammar school was viewed as something privileged, when in fact, there was a merit to passing those exams for the kids who were there, who were all to a man working class kids, the sons and daughters of working class kids. So, but it gave me great grounding, and it's given me great insight into the world. And I come to London, I come to this part of the world, and of politics and of the rest of the country.
You've gone,
Can you
Jonny.
hear me?
Okay, yeah, I can hear you now. Sorry, you disappeared. I don't know if anyone else found that. The one interesting thing, and it really struck me of continuity. This must be on your father's side. So your parents, your grandparents, and your great grandparents were all married in Singers Hill Synagogue. I mean, that's really something special.
I had a real...
Go on. Is that the synagogue you went to?
Yeah, I had a real insight into this sort of the sort of prejudice, the ridiculous prejudice that sometimes exists inside Jewish communities, which I absolutely am appalled by. I hate all intercommunal racism or prejudice, or whatever the word you might call it. I really hate it, because obviously I am from what the Viennese rabbi of our shul in Birmingham called a mixed marriage, which was that my mum was a first generation Viennese, and my dad had been here from a Birmingham family which had been there 4 generations. And he said, it's a mixed marriage, it will never work, and all this kind of nonsense. And I think it was partly tongue in cheek, but there was a sort of element of that sort of prejudice, of a difficulty when you hear this so many times. You hear this about the Sephardim who came to the big cities of France. You hear that about, the old Ashkenazim, the Yekka Jews of, for example, Strasbourg, who didn't like the Moroccans coming. I think it really breaks my heart. I really hate it. And I got married in Singers Hill in Birmingham in 2015 with Karine. And by the way, Karine is Auntie Rachel Awas's niece, the shul administrator, Oliver Sholem, Auntie Rachel.
Yes, I remember.
So we got married there because my father got married there with my mum in 1966. My grandfather, Ernest Gould, in 1936, I think. And then my great-grandfather, Jacob Gould, married Rachel Solomon, Sephardi name, in 18-something. And that shul is beautiful. It's still there. It takes 4 minutes to walk from one end of it to the other. It's run by Rabbi and Rebbetzin Jacobs. Rabbi Jacobs is from Glasgow, and the way he runs that community, all it needs is people. It's amazing, the power of that place, and he has literally brought it back to life. And
how big is the community now?
Not very. It's got a lot of money. That building has, about 8 generations of Gelt and, benefactions, and it's got a big piece of land in the city centre, and that's what maintains it. But the community now, I think, is down to about 2,000. But there's still more than one shul because of that old joke. You can't be seen dead in that one, you know. So there's more than one shul. But you know, there's a kahila, there's a community. I think they join the minyanim together, which is obviously the sensible thing to do. But you know, it's run properly. My friend I grew up with in the same class was the kosher butcher. Unfortunately, he can't sustain his kosher butcher anymore. So you know, and there's still a Jewish school, King David School, which is the school that I went to as a primary school. The issue with that school is that there are 220 kids in it, of which about 25 are Jewish. And the majority of them are Bangladeshi Muslim, because it has a very good academic track record. It gets kids into grammar school, and it still has the Jewish ethos. But when you have Bangladeshi Muslims being taught the Shema for the purposes of looking after the 25 Jewish kids in there, it is a very, very big question about how, you know, its existence. And you know, I hope that a few more Jewish kids can go there. You know, maybe the railway line going from Euston, getting us to Birmingham in 44 minutes, will turn Birmingham into a North London suburb. It might just do that. But the Jewish community in Birmingham is declining, like so many other major cities around Britain.
Well, we'll see what will happen. Jonny, let's move on in your career. So we've got up to the age of 18, your first job. Your first major job with BBC WM. What were you doing there? Was a sports journalist?
I did the sports news on the breakfast show, which was amazing. I remember being on air for the first time, and it was, I could hear myself reading, and I had an out-of-body experience doing it. It was the first time I'd ever been on air. I could hear myself reading fluently, but I was dizzy with the idea of broadcasting to all these people. I remember that very, very vividly. But I got back in my body by the end of the bulletin at 4 minutes and handed back to a guy who was an absolute legend of British radio, local radio, a guy called Tony Butler, whose catchphrase was "on your bike," and he was basically the first Brummie to ever be on air, and he was the sports guy, and I used to go down to St Andrews and report on Birmingham City, and this was a whole new thing, accents in the 70s. Although I was a practitioner of the received pronunciation, amid all this hubba-bubba of brumminess which I'd get in the street. So, you know, let's uphold BBC standards a little bit. So, but that was my first example of experience. And Tony was, you know, my childhood, such a huge part of my childhood. You know, he used to, his blood pressure needed to be checked every time Wolves got a corner in Europe. That is the kind of broadcaster he was. So he was great. He was great, and he's still with us. He's still with us. I think he's about 90, and I would imagine, given what I know about him, he has such a lot of fire in his belly. I'd give him a job still.
And then what happened after WM? You went to Beacon Radio, was it?
Yeah, Beacon Radio. In the middle, I actually came to London for 6 months and got a job with Club Call, which some of you may remember. It's now a completely obsolete concept. It was 0898 telephone commentary, and so I joined that organisation. It was run by BT at the time, and I came down to London for 6 months, which was a bit of a struggle, and then I managed to land myself a job as a sports editor at Beacon Radio, and I was the youngest sports editor in the network at the time, but I was ready for it. It was my area. I mean, it was everything. It just came up to that moment, and I'm so very, very grateful of that opportunity, because it was, you know, 10 miles from my hometown where I lived. We lived on the Wolverhampton side of Birmingham. So in the morning, I used to motor in up the Birmingham New Road to Wolverhampton, do my job from the breakfast show to lunchtime in a newsroom which was very well funded and organised by sponsorship and advertising. It was a modern newsroom. It had internet. It had the early stages of a modem internet, so that we had a wire from the Press Association. This is in the late 80s. You know, the internet did exist in a rudimentary form at that time. And my dad still had his business in Walsall. My family home was in Birmingham. And like all of that has gone. all of it, even the radio station. It's run from Birmingham, and they just syndicate kind of top 30 pop music. So the route that I took home to this blessed place where I grew up it's a melancholy discussion actually for me, because it was such a beautiful thing. And now that everything has been centralized, globalization has squeezed the pips out of everywhere else in this country apart from London and maybe a sort of little island in Manchester, that these kind of things which were a genuine economic model are of the past. And I'm only in my early 50s, and it is a different country, a different economy. And if the Conservatives are really, really more than words about levelling up, they talk about levelling up, making the rest of the country economically viable to compete with London, then they would remember the generation that I benefited from, where genuinely there was a local economy which could support so many regional businesses, irrespective of what was going on in London. If we can decentralize our economy and bring it round to the rest of the country in a free market way, in a genuine free market way, not a statist way, then I'll be a happy old man, Lawrence.
So what are you saying the answer is? Sort of investing in infrastructure, connecting everything up? I mean, the world is certainly, in the last 6 months, in the last 3 months, major changes about how things are going to happen, and these dreams that of pushing out Westminster to different parts of the country. I mean, I can't see it, but you're saying that you hope it's going to happen, or you think it's going to happen?
I saw Michael Gove on Andrew Marr this morning being asked whether they were going to move the House of Lords to York. Every revolutionary in Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party would want the House of Lords schlepped out to York, because of course it would mean that many of the lords and ladies wouldn't be able to go there. So I'm against that, because I think the House of Lords does a good job. Leslie said it. Lord Leslie Turnberg said it in our podcast, and I agree with him. I think a little bit of unelected elder statesmen and women actually does our country the world of good. It's a good thing. But if we can possibly find a way to recalibrate the economy, which isn't a statist concept, which is actually a free market that prompts free market regeneration. I mean, the coronavirus has squeezed the kishkas out of towns and cities. And I mean, the thing that you have to understand is when you go around the country, and I know a lot of people haven't been able to travel. I've had the fortune to travel a little bit during the virus. I checked my eyes in Barnard Castle just to check that I could make the journey, so everything's okay. But in all seriousness, I've been to Eastbourne, which is a town of 170,000 population. And I'm not joking here, there was literally some tumbleweed blowing through the town because the gardeners hadn't looked after the kind of flora and fauna that had that had sort of been misplaced. There wasn't enough rain, and I saw some tumbleweed blowing through shops which are shut. And what I'm saying is you notice it in London, because shops are shut, but not quite as much. There's traffic around, there's still activity, there's still guys on the street, there's still building sites. But the smaller the town, the more damage it has done economically. And then I went to a village called East Dean, and they've literally blocked off the village square. So the pub has shut, obviously, but there's no one there either. And they've shut. I don't know if people are living in those houses. I couldn't get through, but they've blocked it off. So what I'm saying is that the smaller the town, the more damaging this coronavirus has done to economies. And I think we should be mindful of that in London, where obviously we can see the ravages of economic damage, but nothing like in small towns and cities around the country.
Let's get back to my story and your story. So I'd like to know a little bit about your move across to TV and what the difference is, being a broadcaster, being a journalist, being an interviewer on radio and on TV. I mean, is it a major leap? Is it something that just comes naturally? And how did it happen?
I love television, actually. It gives you an opportunity to communicate in a completely different way to radio. Radio is literally a blank sheet where you can create your story around, you know, sound effects and audio and content. Whereas television has this slight quandary where you have to build things around a picture, you know. So sometimes you formulate a story in television around the picture that you're going to make. But then again, there's the communication on screen, which is such a wonderful skill to learn. My opportunity came to move from radio to television in 1998 when the head of news of Channel 5, called Chris Shaw, who was a slightly rotund, short brown-haired, glass-wearing guy, thought I was good enough to be on television. And there was a joke going around the newsroom that Chris was vicariously living his life through me and Vision because we looked quite alike. But Chris really was is one of the best TV people. He really, if everyone remembers when Channel 5 News was came to air, when Channel 5 came to air in 1997, I was part of that. It was young, sort of savvy-looking, yuppie kind of people sitting on desks with purple shirts and ties doing the news, and I was part of that revolution. And I remember Chris unpacked news provision in those after bulletin meetings of all of us there, and he said there's a push towards consumerism, there's a push towards consumer stories, you know, the ideas of change, news that can affect you. This is the sort of, if you like, around the Tony Blair era of becoming Prime Minister. And there were a lot of people who were my colleagues then who've become obviously the big names in TV news 20 years later, people like Charlie State. Charlie is now obviously on BBC Breakfast. He was a colleague and mate of mine from that period. Mark Easton, who is the BBC's Home Affairs correspondent. Juliet Bremner's on ITV. Deborah Turness, the editor, is running, I think, NBC in New York. So there were a lot of people who came out of that. It was like a revision of news. It was the beginning of some new form of news. But it wasn't particularly politically biased. There wasn't a kind of an agenda on Channel 5 for anything except the sort of new generation of, if you like, consumerism, which was that period of the late 90s. And I did the breakfast show. I was the sports guy. I was the crazy sports guy with the female presenter. And we had such a great time. That was 3 wonderful years in the late 90s. And then I went to ITV Sport and presented a show called Football First, which was essentially one of those Bloomberg tickers, a bit like the Jeff Stelling show that you see on Sky Sports now, with great ex-footballers, people like Russell Osman, the Ipswich in England player, Paul Walsh, who I think is on Sky now. Lovely guys, lovely people. Ray Wilkins, God bless him. Ray Wilkins became a good friend of mine and such a humble and lovely man. And told me lots of lovely stories about his days at Chelsea and Manchester United, but usually off camera during the commercial break. He was a very, very nice man, and we miss him. And then I decided that after that, I decided to concentrate on my own business, which was running all the way through this period, which was a radio and internet syndication newsroom in radio, funded entirely by sponsorship. And that business lasted for 23 years. Can you still see me?
Yes, you went, but you're back.
I'm back, yes.
Yes. Carry on. You're talking about sports media. Is that what it was called? It
I set that business up when I was 25 in 1992. It lasted until 2015. It was at the vanguard of new regulatory changes in radio, where you were allowed to sponsor content within speech as long as you made it clear that the editorial was sponsored. It was like a kind of advertorial. So I used to then go off to, I don't know, AXA Equity and Law and make sure that their 2020 cricket matches were broadcast across the country. So if you know, Warwickshire were playing Somerset, I would make sure that the radio stations in Bristol and Birmingham and all the areas around it were served with that local content, and anyone else who wanted that supplementary content. And then we provided bulletins, which made it national. I signed deals with major players like Global Radio, which is the radio stations running Capital and Classic FM and what was Capital Gold and Smooth Radio and lots and lots of other radio stations in there.
Were you still part of TV and radio? Was it still your passion?
I was until about 2001, and then 2002 I did Football Italia, Gazzetta Football Italia, which was that very, very stylish show.
The Channel 4.
Yeah. Golazzo. That was lovely. I was the voice. I was the voice behind the camera, telling everyone about Juventus and Internazionale. It was a beautiful season, doing that with James Richardson, who I think he got the plum job because he was always in Piazza Navona with his massive ice cream, holding up today's Corriere, telling us when, you know, tell us when Gazza was going to go back to England, as they called him over there, or Grazza, which means fat. As well, which was his unfortunate nickname in Italian. So that was that. But after 2001, 2002, I went completely focused back into. I put my TV and radio career on hold to concentrate on sports media, and that was in the end a good decision, because the vagaries of television, you know, you could get, you know, you could be, you know, a cock of the walk 1 minute and the feather duster the next, you know, and that was television. I enjoyed it, but the business of sports media was a great intellectual challenge for the time. And that lasted till 2015. I actually closed the doors on that in 2015, because actually, having been at the vanguard of reinventing the way sponsorship could fund editorial, actually, the end of that era came in 2015, when I think radio was over corporatized and over centralized. Because what we have now is national radio being played through local frequencies. So there's no Radio Trent anymore in Nottingham. There's no BRMB left in Birmingham. You know, all these names named after rivers or local statues or sort of local kind of myths are all gone now in favor of, you know, Capital FM or Heart or, you know, the different brands. And it's very, very, very dull. And it's actually killed the medium of radio on a local basis. And it's a great shame, because there could be so much more creativity on radio if it was more localized. So this is another idea of mine, which tallies in with the sort of the wider macroeconomic ideas of regenerating the country, so that it doesn't always have to be centralized to a major city like London or Manchester.
Talk about this branching off a couple of years ago into podcasts. Why and how is it developing?
I've got to tell you, I am. It's some of the most satisfying work I've ever done, because the people that I'm interviewing on and the subjects that I'm getting down and dirty with them about are snapshots of the very sudden changes that have been imposed on us as Jews, you know. So we walk through security at our shul, and it has been built. I'm trying to turn it. Should we just turn down the...
Gillian and Tom, can you mute? Go on, Johnny.
All I was saying was that, you know, we can even see it in the architecture of our new beautiful shul. You know, it has, you know, it's got a customs area. It's got, you know, it's got a full-time security entry. It's got a very big iron gate. It's got guys on the outside and around the corner. And that is the sad reflection of what's going on. I mean, I walk through Muscle to take my little kids to school. We have a criteria where we're not allowed to congregate outside. You know, we have iron bars and gates and walls, and it's a tragedy, but it's a sad reality of the era that we are living in. And I thought I was on Sky News. I did 10 years of Sky News between about 2009 and 2019. I was the newspaper pundit amongst many people. I used to do one a week on Eamon Holmes' show, on Sarah Jane Mee's breakfast show. Did that for 10 years.
But you've moved away from sport.
Yes, I moved away from sport in 2013. My last gig was with Simon Bates on his breakfast show at Smooth Radio, and then I did Zoe Ball on Radio 2 for about a month. And then in 2013 or 2014, that was the end of it. And I thought, right, the opportunity now is to sort of rethink, if I'm going to continue to be a journalist, how do I use my skills? And the kind of idea of Jewish journalism on a sort of voluntary basis sort of came about, but to do it in a professional way, to do it, as best as I possibly could and get the greatest guests I could. And so in 2018, I began a thing called Jonny Gould's Jewish State, which is not a Zionist call to action. It's like a pun. It's the state of my Jewishness in each broadcast. So the first guests that I had, and they've become very good friends, were Sergeant Benjamin Anthony, a veteran of 3 IDF campaigns of wars, and Brigadier General Amir Avivi, who was in charge of the Israeli army in the Golan and the Negev. And they are typical of Israel, a startup diplomacy. They go around with their military and geopolitical knowledge and have developed a peace plan which is different to Jason Greenblatt's. But the idea is that Israel takes control of the entirety of the West Bank, and that a Palestinian state can be created entirely out of Gaza and then North Sinai under the auspices of the Egyptians, so that it would look a little bit like that. It's a massive plan. It's absolutely enormous, and it requires the cooperation of so many parties. But they were in London talking to Egyptian officials. They'd been to the Houses of Parliament. I have introduced, on behalf of the Miriam Institute, Benjamin's organization, the anti-Semitism envoy Ilan Carr of the Trump administration in Parliament, talking about anti-Semitism, his view of it. There's talk of me going to the United States to advocate on behalf of the Jewish community in this country, to tell them the story of what happened during the Labour anti-Semitism years, and to sort of warn them about what's happening to the Democratic Party in the United States. Because, of course, so many of the Jews of the United States are traditional Democrats. That was the beginning of it. I interviewed these 2 guys about the peace plan. That's episode 1. Then my good friend Mark Lewis made Aliyah with his partner, soon-to-be wife Mandy Blumenthal, another Brummie. And I interviewed Mark about his last few years in the UK, which were traumatic, to say the least. He was a campaigner for Israel against anti-Semitism. He landed himself in a lot of trouble with the Law Society, and was fined very heavily for answering back to Nazis online, people who are deeply anti-Semitic. And he basically described his first few days of Aliyah as a great relief. And that was episode 2. And so once you start with that level of guest, you just got to keep going. And the last 2 guests have been Jason Greenblatt. And the reason, and I've got to thank here my friend Lawrence Risch, who is also a member of South Hampstead Synagogue, because Jason wrote the email to Jason Greenblatt's secretary saying, would you allow my friend Jonny Gould to interview you? And unbelievably, he said yes, the co-architect of Donald Trump's peace plan. So as far as prestige goes, it's really going somewhere. And the most recent guest has been Theresa May's Joint Chief of Staff until 2017, Nick Timothy, who was like me, a Brummie, an Aston Villa supporter. And we talked about, obviously, the brutal and chastening experience of being sacked or resigned by Theresa May after that disastrous election of 2017 for the Tories, which let Corbyn in for another 3 years. And there was an allegation of anti-Semitism in the mudslinging between, you know, Labour and the Tories, where, you know, Labour were trying to deflect from their very real issue of anti-Semitism by trying to attack one of the Tory big dogs, you know, the big Brummy Rasputin with his big beard, Nick. But I got him to answer it and rebut it clearly, because I think we needed to do it, because, you know, Nick is not, could never be described as an anti-Semite. And you know, I didn't really want the issue to be framed in a Jewish podcast in that way. So I put it right at the end of the podcast, and we talk about some huge ideas, macroeconomic ideas, because obviously Nick is a massive brain. And, you know, it's not surprising that he became a chief of staff in Downing Street. He was the Dominic Cummings of the Theresa May era. So these guests really, you know, they really do educate me. They change me. There's some really quite well-known advocates and fighters for the Jewish community in this country. For example, Joseph Cohen. Many of you will know he's the guy with the big red beard who makes these amazing videos, which millions of people have seen. So I went into his video lair and interviewed him, and we talked about why he's, you know, the kind of way he goes about dealing with anti-Jewish racism. He says that actually it's not about, you know, rabbis and vicars meeting together and, you know, having a cup of tea and saying, oh, look, you know, we do love the Christians. Oh, look, we do love the Jews. That bit's fine. And, you know, they're fine. It's about getting into the Islamists. It's about, you know, tackling them in the street, which is what Joseph does. And he's, my goodness me, he's the bravest guy. My goodness, he's a brave guy. And he goes in there and makes videos and actually exposes their hypocrisies. When the attack happened on our shul on the 29th of December, 2019, he went to that terrible vigil, you know, outside the odd bins up in Hampstead, which was not a vigil for us. It was a hard left hijacking of that daubing, basically. And he went about really interviewing those people on a level and exposing them for what they were. And I went on I-24 because there was this narrative that was suddenly coming out afterwards in the immediate aftermath of that daubing, which said something like, this is far right. It was not far right. It was Corbyn's people, and that sort of hard left anti-Semitism. That's what it was. And together, everyone, you know, if everyone can understand that, because it is very difficult to understand. You know, when you see daubing, you know, a Jew sees that as Jew hate. We don't know what it is. You have to really understand what you're looking at. And we knew what it was. So that's Joseph. David Collier, another guy that probably many of you will know, Mishtal, who is an amazing guy who writes report after report on amnesty, on textbooks with anti-Israel stuff in them that he tries to get pulped. He again goes onto the streets and talks about these things. But it's not just about anti-Semitism, it's also about positive things. I got into a habit of doing some Netflix dramas. I covered some Netflix stories, Unorthodox. I managed to get the author of Unorthodox, Deborah Feldman, to talk about her remarkable personal story of leaving the Satmar community to lead a multicultural life, for want of a better description, in Berlin. Fauda, which is it's the most intense drama about counter-terrorism and Israel's attempts to counter it inside enemy lines. And then finally, the amazing story of the Red Sea Spies, this audacious attempt to rescue, to take Jews out of refugee camps, Ethiopian Jews, out of refugee camps inside Sudan, 700 kilometers inside enemy territory. And I managed to get an interview, the first of its kind in English around the world, with the actual Mossad commander, who spoke to me so beautifully about his heroics. And honestly, that's one of the most humbling interviews of the campaign. I've also interviewed Baroness Deitch about the Holocaust Memorial, about Poland, about all the things that she supports.
Jonny, you seem so much.
It's been great.
You've been very passionate and animated when you're talking about about political issues and Jewish issues. Have you fallen out of love with sport? I mean, do you miss it?
Well, we're playing Crystal Palace today, and we're 7 points adrift of safety. And we're probably getting relegated. The truth is, I can't unlearn all the many, many years of passionate support and journalism that I accrued in football, but I would be dishonest if I said I still enjoyed the game, because there's quite a lot of it, which I find really quite revolting. They sound like strong words, but I am disillusioned with football. And, it began a few years ago and it has continued. And, I suppose if I had a job, if I still worked inside football, then, I might have a different view. But looking at it further and further from the outside, the only office I have in football is director of the Aston Villa Supporters Trust. That's all I have left in football. And a few tweets about Villa losing.
But that's really important in keeping it local, isn't it? I mean, you have all these multinationals and oil money coming in, but the importance of keeping it local and doing local events, local charities. I mean, that's where the Aston Villa supporters trust comes into it, and I do notice a lot of footballers, they are pushed perhaps to be more involved locally, and that really has to be the answer in a way to keep these little football communities, going.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at a football club like Aston Villa, like Liverpool, Manchester United, Manchester City, Arsenal, Spurs, Chelsea, there's a concentric circle. There's the activists in the area who are season ticket holders. There's the community around them who have moved out of the area but still go, who still have an affiliation. And then there's this massive international concentric circle. And I think it's fair to say Aston Villa is one of a number of football clubs that are communities of interest worldwide. So that it's not just about Birmingham anymore, it's about Ghana, it's about Malaysia. There are supporters clubs in California, and they really are supporters. There's these guys, I'm not joking here, there is a tribe of Ghanaian people who live in a Ghanaian village, and you can imagine it. It has, mud track roads and, pretty humble looking buildings. And they run through their village after they've won. They are all wearing Aston Villa shirts, singing Ghanaian tribal songs. This is the power of the English game. This is our Hollywood. We are syndicating these concepts around the world. I had an absolutely beautiful video, honestly, from a guy in Iraq. This is like, you can barely believe this existed. There's a guy in Iraq, right? They're called the Iraqi Lions. The Lions is our nickname, right? This guy is about my age, and his name's Hassan El Fahahi. And he did this video in Arabic, right? Talking about Aston Villa, factually correct. This guy really supports Villa. And he got his chevra in Jordan, Kuwait, Libya, Lebanon, and somewhere else, I think Iran, I'm not sure, to basically talk in Arabic or Farsi. And they were like, the words were Arabic, and then in the middle of the sentences he's going blah, 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 Aston Villa, like this. And I wrote to him and I retweeted this thing, and I said, I'm going to send you my latest podcast with Jason Greenblatt, and we're talking about peace between Israel and the Arab world. Would you like to see it, and will you send it around your kahila? Will you send it around your community? And then he comes back and he says, this is what happened. He said, all we want is peace with Israel so that we can live our normal and regular lives. Amen. And he put a little Israeli flag. And I said, do you mind if I take a photo of that and tweet it? And basically we came up with, I said, may Aston Villa be the tabernacle of peace between us. Really, I mean, this is the thing. You can find men of goodwill, women of goodwill anywhere you want. And that is actually the power of football. So when you talk about, the local butcher buying up Manchester City and operating it for 40 years, now it is about international globalist billionaires running it. But actually the consequence of that is this community of interest. And if we can communicate the sport as a tabernacle of peace, then I think that can be my relationship with football now that Villa are completely rubbish.
Well, Jonny, please don't lose your last link to the football world.
Thank you.
Yeah, please don't. Jonny, I've got here, I've written Jonny Gould's 10 choices, okay? This is where we're really going to find out who the real Jonny Gould is, okay?
This is where I ruin it. This is where I ruin it.
Yeah, well, okay, so these are just a choice of two things, and very quickly you've got to choose between the two. So, okay, so we're going to find out whether the number one, whether the Jonny Gould is an Ashki boy or not, okay? So this is food. So, Jonny, what is it? Is it hummus falafel in pita with a salad and everything on it, or smoked salmon and cream cheese bagels?
It's lokshen soup with knedlach with carrots.
Answer the question, mate.
That's it. Well, it's smoked salmon and cream cheese bagels, but the very highest, I think the highest order, the highest gift we gave to the world was lokshen soup with knedlach and lokshen.
Well, one day I'll invite you around.
Carrots.
You can have my chicken soup.
Excellent.
With the knedlach, the best one. Okay,
Lovely.
number two of your 10. Holidays, okay, is it the Croisette Beach in Cannes or the Tel Aviv Tayelet?
See, my missus is French, and we go to Cannes because that's where my mother and father-in-law go. So, I suppose the Tayelet in Tel Aviv would be the ultimate answer, because of course Karine also has a brother in Tel Aviv. But I can't deny we've been to the Croisette a couple of times. I can't deny it.
So that's a draw, yeah?
It's a draw, but Tel Aviv will win on penalties.
Okay, well done. And while you're there, Jonny, okay, so you're going to buy a new pair of beautiful swimming trunks that you can parade up and down the Croisette or the Tayelet. Tell me, are they claret and blue or blue and white?
Oh dear. Well, they're claret and blue. I'll get told off by the missus.
So they're claret and blue?
They've got to be.
Right, correct answer. Okay, bit of culture, Jonny. In the evening, where will you be? In Covent Garden or Ronnie Scott's?
Oh, I think Ronnie's.
Ronnie Scott's. I thought so.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Apologies now for the non-football aficionados here, but a couple of football questions. So, Peter With or Andy Gray?
Well, now you see, Andy Gray has become a very good friend of mine, and we're quite close. We talk quite a lot on social media. Andy's out in Dubai working with Richard Keys these days for Al Jazeera, which is now called Be In Sports. And I interviewed Peter With about his life story in a wonderful book about his amazing career. I think I just, for his sheer work ethic and his ability to transcend Liverpool for about 5 seasons with Aston Villa and Nottingham Forest, I'm going to go for Peter With, because I think he's one of my all-time football heroes.
Didn't he score the winning goal? Didn't he score the winning goal in the cup, the European Cup final? He
did. He scored the most important goal in our football history. So we joined Bela Gutmann on the parade of great European champions, Aston Villa and Benfica, and for that matter, Real Madrid. You name it, we're champions too.
Number 6.
Take that away from us.
Number 6.
You've forgotten someone.
Kemp's involved. We've got Kemp on. Kemp's back on. He can smell the pride.
Number 6. Brian Clough or Ron Saunders?
Oh,
well, that is hard because obviously I love Ron, but Brian Clough is an all-time hero of mine. And I mean that upsets a lot of Aston Villa fans. But Brian Clough, I mean, for what he did.
Well, with the brown envelopes, I thought that chased you away from football.
You know, all our heroes have faults, don't they? But Brian Clough, for what he did, a bit like Peter With, who became this hero in spite of Liverpool, being from Liverpool, you know, being not good enough to have played for Everton and Liverpool, and then sticking it up them for those years with Forest and Villa. That's Peter with Brian Clough, you know, for achieving what he did both at Derby County and Nottingham Forest, this sheer sense of sticking to one's values. The same as Zinedine Zidane, my favourite player of them all. So I'm going to go for Brian Clough, even though Ron Saunders holds a very, very special place in my heart for what he did. He changed Aston Villa to this day. But it's got to be Brian, young man.
No,
Nobody's stupid enough to write us off.
In a minute, Andrew. Number 7. Okay. Are you there, Johnny?
Oh, battery, hang on. Yeah. Hang on, are you there?
Number 7. Okay, so the BBC have phoned you up, okay? And they're offering you a chance to be the commentator at one of these 2 events. And you can only choose one. Which one would it be? 2013, Andy Murray, Wimbledon final, or 2012, London Olympics, Super Shabbos. Which one?
Wasn't it after Shabbos?
No, they won 6 golds that day.
Okay. I went to the Sunday event. I went to the 100 meters where they were given the medals. So I was on the Sunday one, where Usain Bolt won his latest 100 meters. The tennis, because I was at the greatest tennis event of all time, and it physically left me buzzing. And that was the 2008 final between Federer and Nadal, which Nadal won. And I was very privileged enough not just to see that final from a wonderful position up in the gods, but also to go to the news conference afterwards. And there were only about 30 of us there because it was 11 o'clock at night. And they both walked in to the desk, you know, the Wimbledon desk they have, this sort of very, you know, the news conference they have. And it was one of the most emotional news conferences I've ever been to, because Federer had done what Borg had done, which is win 5 in a row and then failed at the 6th. And you can never undo that, you know? And actually it sent Borg off into unraveling and he never came back. And so he kept on doing this, Federer. I'd like to congratulate Rafa. Like, he looked like he was having a bit of a breakdown.
So it's Wimbledon. I'm going to rush you, Johnny, because we're running out of time.
Okay.
But it's Andy Murray.
Andy Murray.
Here. Okay.
Yeah. But
number 8.
The humility between those 2 sportsmen was what sport was about. They loved each other and they respected each other. And that was amazing.
Well, you got it right. That's the one I put. Number 8. Okay, look, we know you're a man of great talent, looks and everything. And you've just been called by Sony. They're remaking 2 films about broadcasters, okay? And they want you to be the leading role, which you can only choose one. Okay, yes. You can only choose one. Which is it going to be? This is Good Morning Vietnam. You're the new Robin Williams.
Lovely.
Or Network, that great old film with Peter Finch.
No, Robin Williams, because that was great radio. What a great radio host he was. I mean, he didn't do that as a job, but he would have been an amazing presenter. Robin Williams.
Correct. You've got 2 more to go, okay? This one you've really got to think about. Now, this is about great interviewers that you've met in your broadcasting life, okay? Which one is the best interviewer? So you've got, number 1, Michael Parkinson, or number 2, Lawrence Gould.
Oh, God, you know,
I know.
Just an hour ago, I would have said Parky. And you know, even a week ago, I'd have gone Lawrence who? But now, you know, I've seen this guy's work in action. So it's this guy Lawrence Gould. He's going to go a long way. He's going a long way.
Okay, the final question. Everything depends on this. Okay, this is about the venue. Okay, where you want to give your most precious, your most special interview. Okay, would it be Southampton Synagogue Old Stadium or the Southampton Synagogue New Stadium?
Oh, the new stadium propels this community into the sort of the new realms of shuldom. It's like the Shul Dome, isn't it? It's like the greatest. It's like the Shul expressed like as a basketball stadium in America. It's the new kind of how it should be. And you know, you've got to applaud the whole community for this amazing thing. All it needs is one of those slow motion drones to fly over it, saying, you know, this is culinary, you know, and this, you know, the stadium is set for the.
Did you say slow motion?
Amazing. Exactly. That's more than one play on words there in just that moment. Amazing. Yeah, this new shul is amazing. And I was talking to Ben Turner about our amazing shul. And I was in shul yesterday, and Shlomo Odd said, you know, having been away from the shul for so long, you know, maybe we were taking it for granted. Maybe we should appreciate things more. And I was thinking to myself, you know, I've never stopped appreciating this new amazing building, because it really is. It's really something else, our new building. And it's a great, great facility. And I was laughing with Ben Turner about this, about this on Yom Kippur, and we decided that we were the Manchester City of communities, having, you know, come from sort of very humble 1980s near relegation to this amazing stadium. You know, who has a shul like this? Who has a building like this? No one. And I think we should all applaud and remember and be lifted by such an amazing building.
And on those very wise words, Jonny, thank you very, very much.
It's been my pleasure.
It's been my pleasure as well, really. I've enjoyed speaking to you. I've enjoyed my first venture into interviewing, and I'm sure the rest of the community and the people listening have enjoyed it too. But,
long may you reign. Long may you reign in your role, Lawrence.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
Hold on.
Thank you, Lawrence.
Pleasure.
Lawrence, this is a new career for you.
Well, I don't know about that, Gillian.
Fantastic. Very well done.
Thank you.
There's always room at the top.
Not a man at my height. Definitely not. I'd fit under the door.
Thank you very much. That was really, really nice.
Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Linda. Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. Bit of Forest reference.
Have a
there
great
for you.
day, everyone.
Thank you very much again for a terrific Sunday morning.
I gave you a Villa reference as well.
You did.
Villa reference as well. Did you see my picture?
I'm gonna look now.
No, I put a picture up of Ron Saunders, and I said Johnny's hero.
Oh yes, so you did. Oh yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Well.
I just wanted to ask
That's
you,
right.
Johnny, which interview on the podcast have you enjoyed the most, and why?
Very good.
That is a good question. I really enjoyed sitting on the same sofa in the lounge of Edna and Leslie Turnberg, because it was a proper conversation, and it was made possible by the little recording equipment. But to have Leslie's depth of understanding and experience, life experience as well, to be able to talk about Balfour and the state of Israel almost in real time, and to talk about the history of being Jewish in Manchester, from his background to how he's managed to become this person in this position, his medical career, was really a very, very very, very special moment. But you know what? There have also been others too. I interviewed Baroness Deitch in the reception at the Royal College of Physicians, and I was arrested by the frankness of her interview. She didn't hold back at all. I didn't really need to ask any questions. She was at it. She really was. They were two. The Jason Greenblatt interview, I kind of sensed while I was doing it that you know, we were talking about something very, very important, because these letters were going out about annexation, and I wanted that rebutted. I wanted the man who delivered the peace plan to actually talk back and to actually address them. And I think probably the most humbling one was what I hope will become a bit of a historical document, the one with the Mossad commander Danny, who only agreed to do the interview on account that he wouldn't have his surname revealed. I know he's done 3 or 4 shul talks in London, but that's all he's done.
Yeah.
And, you know, he really is a national hero, and his story in Israel just isn't known. But to work for 5 years behind enemy lines, taking, you know, Ethiopian Jews out of Sudanese refugee camps is one of the sort of the highest acts of bravery. And he didn't get caught either in that 5 years by anyone. That was an amazing, amazing story too. Red Sea Spies, that one's called.
Red, I think. Oh, right, that's your interview. It's called.
Yeah.
But Red Sea
Johnny,
Diving-
Johnny,
Red
I'm
Sea
still
Diving.
here. I'll tell you one of the most fascinating interviews that I saw you give on YouTube was when you were at the Geneva summit for what was it?
Human rights.
Human rights and democracy. That's right. And you interviewed this Yazidi girl. I mean, goodness me.
Oh dear.
I mean, that was. I found that quite hard. I don't know how you coped with that, but what audience were you in front of? That's what I couldn't see.
I was in front of a delegation of invited people, including my brand new friend that day, the former president of Switzerland, Ruth Dreyfus, and people from around the world were reporting. It's Hillel Neuer's event, and obviously Hillel being at the epicenter of, you know, the UN's delegitimization of Israel, and he's basically a human rights champion, Hillel, and he had invited these delegates from all over the world, people like the Yazidi woman, Farida Abbas Khalaf, who I interviewed in her native language with an interpreter.
Yes.
And there was also the Tibetan monks who fight the Chinese. There were various Iranian prisoners of conscience. There were guys from Vietnam. My goodness me, you realize how lucky you are here. I mean, we had our scares, didn't we? While Corbyn was nearly prime minister, was leader of the opposition. But these people are beaten, you know, taken out of their, you know, offices, and physically beaten into disablement because they dare talk against a regime. And
she was incredible, because, you know, I was watching. I watched it because I wanted to watch you, but I watched it and I found her mesmerizing. Obviously, I didn't understand a word she was saying apart from when her interpreter came on. But I've still got the vision of her, you know, someone who had been beaten, tortured, raped, and she was willing to come, and she had a humility, she had a beauty about her, and I don't think I'll lose that picture. So really, I mean, if someone has got some time and they want to see something very special, I found that interview incredible.
Yeah. Thank you. It was a very, very special privilege, and she was extremely humble. I'm delighted to say she married, and she
wrote a book.
She wrote a book, and she's got married. She lives in peace in Cologne in Germany, like many of the Yazidi people who managed to get out of their country in northern Iraq. There are still, though, most of the Yazidis in the world on that mountaintop in Sinjar, still even to this day. But the guy that was on stage with me, Saeed Qasim Suleiman, became an advocate and visited parliaments all over the world, basically ensuring that, you know, the Yazidi voice was heard. So to have contributed a little bit of an interview that people are interested that then go and see really helps. To answer Andrew's question, who's coming up next, I'm going to look at cancel culture. I'm going to interview Trevor Phillips.
Oh, good.
And Inaya Folarin Iman, who is a young woman who is chairman of the Free Speech Union, and doesn't play the game, doesn't play the Black Lives Matter game, isn't commoditized into being a black person just by definition of who she is. So we're gonna sort of get into the cancel culture. I think even I've been a victim of it for daring to call my podcast Jonny Gould's Jewish State. I think I'm being cancelled by a lot of the media. So we're going to talk about that. The Hungarian ambassador to the UK is coming on. Now, I was given his address and his access by Ohad Zemet at the Israeli embassy because of the relationship that is growing between Hungary and Israel. And one of the very, very earliest references he made in our interview, which will be released soon, is what he called the Hungarian Holocaust. Okay, so he is, on behalf of his country, admitting an involvement. And when you talk about Eastern and Central European countries, they don't. And Poland is one of those examples where, you know, you're not allowed to say it's the Polish Holocaust. It's got to have been someone else's fault. And that's why there's a broigus between Israel and Poland. It's a real schism, it's a real problem. But when it comes to Hungary, you know, there is a bit of introspection going on, and that interview's coming very soon. And then I'm delighted to say that James Marlowe, with our first Israel briefing, which was basically a news report between us, a Q&A, we did our first one at the point where Netanyahu and Gantz were forming a unity government. We're going to do another one on the ceding of Israeli sovereignty, the application of law in Judea and Samaria. So that's coming up too. It's going to be good.
I'm off. Thank you very, very much, Jonny. I look forward to seeing you in 3D.